All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Obviously we'd like to thank Stockhoff and very much the sponsors, other people that have contributed to this. Hopefully today will be a good day. The weather's not going to cooperate too well, but today we'd like to try to talk about laminitis and go through its acute phase from just a Farrier standpoint. So obviously there's a lot of pathophysiology, a lot of things that we're not going to talk about. We're going to try to just think about just the Farrier perspective and acute laminitis and also chronic laminitis. And then this afternoon we're going to try to shoe a horse if it arrives at that next. Okay, so obviously I'm curious if you guys have any questions. This can be as informal as you'd like. If you want to stop, raise your hand, ask questions, talk about it, discuss amongst yourself. This is a great avenue to exchange ideas and get a lot of information out there. So obviously this time of year, laminitis is a big concern, so we'll start going through it. And I tell you, through laminitis and most Farrier activities or treating various different disease pathologies or conformation defects, all these things, I tend to just think simply in the term of principles, like what the problem is and what I would like to achieve to help it, more so than rather specific techniques. Okay, because I think the specific techniques is when a lot of people butt heads. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems between the vet-Farrier relationship is when specific methods or specific techniques are dictated and demanded to a person or an individual that doesn't necessarily agree with it or isn't comfortable doing it or is unfamiliar with it. It just doesn't lend itself to success. So I think you should, if you can, think in terms of principles, because again, we all know there's 1,000 different ways to do things. If we're to bring a horse in here and we're all to look at it, all to assess it, and all to shoe it, there's probably be a great deal of variation in it. Okay? But if we think in terms of principles of what you would like to achieve, those things are difficult to argue or rarely argued. Okay? So when we think about the mechanical principles of treating an acute laminitic, it's as simple as we would like to reduce the stress and strain on the lamellar interface. Okay? So we're talking just from a Farrier perspective. Obviously a lot would be going on with the veterinary treatment of this horse, but we'd like to reduce the stress and strain on the lamellar interface, and that means both statically and dynamically. So when I say statically, I mean just the horse's body weight, so just when it's standing there. So the principles would be recruiting the frog and sole into load bearing as best you can, however you choose to do that. And then dynamically, that's when a horse goes to move. So there's a wonderful term, breakover out there, but essentially it's just when the horse moves in any direction. And I think a lot of attention is focused on breakover in a straight or lateral plane, but most of these horses are standing in a stall. Most of their movement's going to be turning one way or the other like this. So I think you should really pay attention to the lever arms on the side of the hoof capsule. So more so rolling the edges or reducing the amount of energy or stress or strain that would be placed on the lamellar interface when the horse is both walking in a straight line, but also turning. I think that's a huge thing that's often missed because it doesn't show up nicely in a lateral or any direction. Okay. And the other thing we'd like to do is obviously preserve sole depth. I think that's the key to success for a lot of these guys. Addressing the dorsal hoof wall or trying to make the dorsal hoof wall match the dorsal surface of the distal phalanx is something that can be argued. So that's one of the reasons why there's a question there. We'll go through them. We might incorporate derotational shoeing along with deep visual flexor tenotomies for horses that are progressively rotating in front of your eyes. So if they can't be stopped, if they can't stabilize themselves, if they're progressively rotating, it's not uncommon to cut the deep visual flexor tendon and then actually derotate the distal phalanx and put it in a more normal plane as it relates to the ground and not necessarily the horse's hoof capsule. Okay? And we might incorporate possible dorsal hoof wall groovings, like coronary band groovings or coronary band resections, or even potentially entire dorsal hoof wall resections. Okay, so we'll go through them, but those are the things we'll talk about today. Okay, and so it's important to remember in firm footing or when a horse is standing on a shoe, on impenetrable footing. So if you were to stand a horse on a shoe on this asphalt, almost all of its body weight would be suspended through the lamellar interface throughout the entire hoof capsule itself. Okay, so obviously today we're going to talk a great deal about frog and sole support. So recruiting the frog and sole into load bearing will hopefully ease or decrease some of the stress and strain on the lamellar interface itself. Okay, there are many, many different ways to do that. Obviously, there's a picture of kind of what we want to achieve, but we know that we can do that any number of ways. Okay, so first, a nice easy one is just incorporating a sand stall. So if the horse is going to be living in a stall while it's standing in sand, it will, passively recruit the frog and sole into load bearing just by simply balling up in the horse's hoof caps, and we're allowing the hoof wall to penetrate through the sand. Okay, so a nice displaceable footing material will do the job. Okay, so obviously that's what it's designed to do. Allow again the hoof wall to sink within the sand itself, and then load the frog and sole pretty passively, but when it's recruiting in. Okay, I would tell you that anything you can do to encourage a horse with acute laminitis to lie down is a good thing. It's generally just the horse's body weight that is the problem. So there's any number of things you can do. Trying to sling them, which we all can imagine is quite difficult to manage a horse in a sling, but anything you can do to encourage them to lie down. So stand stalls, deeply, heavily bedded stalls, and straw. Anything you can do to encourage them to lie down. And sometimes it's even, you should go as far as to even talk about just the sheer basic principles of this. So if you think about a horse lying down, if it's in a boarding barn with 40 other horses and there's activity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you've got this horse in the middle stall, right where the wash rack is, right where you head into arena. That's probably a bad spot to put. Okay, so thinking about where you can put the horse away from other horses enough that it's not going to be stressed, but in a nice, quiet, peaceful part of the barn where they would be more encouraged to lie down. And then I would tell you, as a farrier, the more work you can do while they're lying down is a good thing. So when they're in an acute laminitic phase, obviously they're very difficult to stand and work on. And so when you're trying to hold them up, forcing them to hold up one foot to work on one foot, you could potentially be doing a lot of destruction or damage with the other foot. So anything you can do, catch them at the right time, find them while they're laying down. Obviously, few people as possible go into the stall, keep everything nice and quiet. All that seems really simple and basic, but I find it's something that's never talked about and really never thought about. But the more you can do with them on the ground, the better while they're lying down. And, horses that are in this kind of distress or pain, they don't want to just jump up. So if you go in nice and calm and just peacefully work on them, it's not uncommon to be able to get a lot done while they're on the ground. There are other ways, so if you can't put them in a sand stall or something, there are other ways to passively recruit the frog and sole into load bearing without causing discomfort. So with acute laminitis, when we talk about recruiting the frog and sole into load bearing, it's a very simple statement. That's something that I think we can all agree that we'd like to do, but it's not uncommon for the horse to resist. Okay, so what we think of as protection and support on the bottom of the foot is very easily perceived as pressure and pain from the animal. So if it's sole sore through the toe, it may resent some frog and sole support material. So familiarizing yourself with as many different products as you possibly can out there on the market, or ways that you could recruit the frog and sole into load bearing, is important. So the ones that resent it the most and basically resent all pressure to a certain extent, we use very soft closed cell foam pads simply taped to the bottom of the foot to again provide some artificial sole depth and recruit the frog and sole into load bearing, hopefully without causing resentment or pressure and pain from it. Okay? So these are just taped on there. Very nice little foam pad. Obviously, styrofoam, Home Depot would work. Any number of things would work, but you're looking for something very soft, and then you'd like to familiarize yourself with many other different products and different densities. So the soft ride hoof boots make a nice, again, frog and sole support material. I'll tell you, in most laminatics, we typically cut the frog insert out, just because it seems to, I shouldn't say overload the frog, but it seems if a horse is left in soft rides for many months at a time with that frog insert, or even just in the boot itself, their heels do kind of fold and collapse over time because they can be too soft. But soft ride does make several different inserts of varying different densities, and it's not uncommon for acute laminatics to like one density one day and then prefer another density the next day, or have one in and it's fine, and then hate it. And all you do is just switch it out to something softer as happy and comfortable again. so it's important to read them and let them tell you kind of what they like. But the goal would be to put as firm of a frog and sole support material in there as the horse can possibly tolerate. So the more dense it is, the more firm it is, the more support you're offering to the lumbar interface. It's just you cannot go beyond the point of what they will tolerate. Okay. There are other different things out there, and so I realize we're in Kentucky, and so perhaps the Red Ultimate is still heavily used. Obviously, with them, you can still recruit the frog and sole into load bearing with the various different impression materials that are out there, from Sound Force, from Nanrip, from EDSS. You know, it seems like everybody's making some sort of impression material now to recruit the frog and sole into load bearing, and it seems that they're all kind of different. So again, not committing yourself to one brand, but looking at various different densities will make you a more well-rounded person to use during these laminated episodes. Okay, the wedge itself is probably a debatable thing. So are these, you guys familiar with these? Do you guys use a lot of these here in Kentucky? The big wedges? Anybody know the theory behind it and what it's used for? Okay. What's it used for? Yep, scream it out. Okay, so she's saying that some of the ones that she's seen doesn't help or doesn't provide comfort, because this does put the distal phalanx at a markedly steeper angle, right? Okay, so the theory is wedging them to a point to where it decreases tension on the deep digital flexor tendon, which hopefully reduces some tension on the dorsal lamellar interface, right? But the more steep you make the distal phalanx, the more shear force you put on the lamellar interface throughout the hoof capsule. So I tell you, my personal experience, we do not use them very much, particularly on like low flat-footed horses. It's not uncommon to put this on and then see the horse sink. Okay? But if you, let's say you already had a horse with, let's say, a flexural limb deformity, it's already a really steep, really upright, clubby type foot that already has an overloaded deep digital flexor tendon on a normal day. If you were worried that horse was becoming laminitic, you can certainly make the argument that this might be the exact thing that it needs, that we might allow the distal phalanx to get steeper and increase the shear force on it from a weight standpoint, but we already know that it's an extreme tension on the digital flexor muscular-tendon unit anyway, and so using that in that sentence may be a great thing. So again, that's why, you know, we all tend to have our gut reactions, our things like, oh, I like that, I use it all the time, or oh, I hate that thing, I'll never use it. But I encourage you just to think critically about them and see if there is a situation in which you might want to use it or anything else. The more open-minded you are, the more you try things, just the more well-rounded you are, and the more you might find the solution for that once in a lifetime or that one unique case. So I tell you, to be critical for sure, think through everything, but maybe not be as close-minded as our profession often gets a reputation. Okay, so again, something you could use, but I would tell you, if this is something you do use, I would be really concerned about how they're applied and how you replace them or take them off. Okay, so I think if you put these on a laminitic, you're committed to them for a while. Okay, you can't just put them on, you know, decrease tension on the digital flexor and allow it to contract just for sheer pain response, and then the next day just say, oh hell, this isn't working, and take it off. And then just drop right back down, and any plus you might have gotten out of it is gone. Okay? And again, I think there's little point in trying to take these on if they stay on for 2 hours a day and they're off for 22 hours a day, or they're twisted, or God forbid they spin the wrong way or spin medially or laterally. Okay, so think about it, even from a farrier standpoint of if you're treating a horse with these on, you know, and you show up to turn it, I think you need to ask yourself, well, what am I going to do when I want to put the foot down to grab another tool, or go to the truck and check something, or to check Facebook on my phone? You know, I think you need to think about those things and not just let it drop straight to the ground. And then come up with a very specific plan of how you're going to slowly step it down out of the wedge over time. Does that make sense? everybody. So my biggest fear is not whether you use them or not, it's just using them judiciously and making sure that you have a plan for coming out of them sooner or later down the road. So, and again, we talk so much about frog and soul support, and this little video will hopefully just kind of remind you why. So I talk a lot about it, but I think it's often forgotten or even unrecognized how much the distal phalanx moves within the hoof capsule. So this is just a hoof explant with a bone over to the left, the hoof wall over to the right, and then right through the middle of it is the lamellar interface. Something. And so it'll take just a second to get started, but you'll watch it move. And I think sometimes it's unrecognized, or we perhaps even forget how much movement of the distal phalanx there is within the hoof capsule. So this is just with light finger pressure, and you can see how easily moved the lamellar interface is. And this will hopefully show you how much the distal phalanx can sink within the hoof capsule in both the medial, lateral, and dorsopalmar plane. So I know, we've said the words frog and soul support 1,000 times already, but this is why. I mean, the hoof capsule is not this piece of wood or this big piece of concrete. I mean, you've got a bony column suspended through the lamellar interface throughout the hoof capsule. So there is a great deal of movement of the distal phalanx within the hoof capsule itself. And did that make sense to everybody? And this video will hopefully keep that burned into your mind. So when you're thinking about doing these things, finding a way to recruit as many structures as possible to protect that apparatus, I think is very, very important. Okay. So I do think radiographic assessment should be used to monitor the placement of the distal phalanx within the hoof capsule. So ideally, lateral DP views are taken, at least upon presentation of lameness or showing signs of clinical lameness. I would encourage. Are there any vets in here? No. Okay. So I obviously would encourage, vets, farriers, whoever. Obviously, the vet is the one taking the radiograph, but whoever's seeing the case. So let's say, you as a farrier get called out to see this acutely lame laminitic. I would strongly encourage you to recruit a vet into the equation, because the placement of the distal phalanx in the hoof capsule does need to be monitored. So I think those two radiographic views, meaning a 0-degree lateral, centered at the distal margin of the distal phalanx, will show you the lateral view of where the distal phalanx is within the hoof capsule. But also, I think, and that's the classic one where we see or mark or monitor rotation. But I think it's very important to take the DP view as well, because the distal phalanx within the hoof capsule doesn't just rotate in one direction, doesn't just sink straight down. It can rotate and sink medially or laterally. So I mean, it is a three-dimensional structure within the hoof capsule, so it can move a number of different ways. So radiographs help monitor that, and I think they should be repeated every 2 to 5 days, at least until the horse is stabilized. So by stabilized, I mean the horse is whatever causing the laminitic insult is stopped or eliminated or ameliorated or eliminated. And then the horse being stabilized, meaning that it has started to become comfortable and starting to grow hoof again. Okay, but I think you should continually monitor it, and then these radiographic changes, or even if you don't see any radiographic changes, will likely guide treatment and also trimming and chewing itself.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
At the vet school, has anyone come up with a crazy idea to try to put a pin through the wall, through the coffin door, and back out the other side?
Yeah. So the question is, has anybody thought of trying to put pins through the hoof capsule to suspend the distal phalanx with the hoof capsule? And yes, that's been tried. The external fixators have been built to try to suspend the MC3 or the cannon bone on external fixators to eliminate, the distal displacement of the distal phalanx through the hoof capsule. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work. Obviously, there's a big difference between an external fixator for a 1,200-pound warm blood and a 3-pound swallow. There's just not quite a way to do it. So it was tried, not at our vet school, but it just simply did not work. But
good idea. So lots of things have been done for acute laminitis, from stripping the entire hoof capsule away, from creating external fixators to, amputation and prosthetics. Lots of things have been done. But obviously it's a very costly, debilitating disease that we know more about now, but is obviously still a huge unknown and a huge problem within the equine community. Okay, so when we talk about radiographs, I think, a lot of times we can lose sight of the forest for all the trees when you're looking at a radiograph. So from a farrier standpoint, I would tell you the things that we would like to look at the most are all of these measurements. And for me as a farrier, what tends to make it or break it the most is the horse's sole depth. So if you're just taking a measurement from the distal margin to the distal phalanx to the ground. Okay? And we could argue all day what that measurement should be, and it probably does vary to horses at a certain degree. I think most commonly accepted is for comfort in a barefoot horse would be roughly 15 millimeters to 2 centimeters would be ideal, but we rarely ever reach ideal. And I think getting down to the minutiae to that fine 1 millimeter difference is probably a little bit of a waste of time. Okay? And so we'd like to ensure that the horse has adequate sole depth, monitor the horse's sole depth. So if we're taking radiographs over a series of time, sole depth is something we like to preserve and like to add to. So the horse should be growing sole depth as you're moving through. If that number is decreasing and you're not the one taking it away, then that's a sign of a problem. Okay? Another commonly associated measurement with acute laminitis is measuring from the coronary band to the top of the extensor process. And again, we could sit and confuse ourselves with numbers all day long. It doesn't really matter, and there's a lot of variation in horses. But the main thing is, if you have a radiograph on Monday that says that distance is X, and then you have that same radiograph on Friday and it says that distance is X plus 5 millimeters, you've got a problem. Obviously, it shows that the horse is sinking within the hoof capsule. Okay, there's a lot of talk about the horn-lamellar distance, so measuring from the parietal surface of the distal phalanx to the dorsal surface of the hoof wall. And again, a lot of argument in what that measurement should be, or could be, and then obviously noting that as farriers we can change that number drastically with a RAS. And so in reality, to get the true benefit of them, you need, again, that radiograph from Monday that shows that measurement is X, and then you need a radiograph on Friday that shows that number is staying the same or it's increasing. And you need to know, as part of the team treating this horse, did somebody change it physically with a RAS? So that one can change a lot. And so if you have the top staying the same and the bottom growing, so the top stays at like 20, and this becomes 25, 26, 27, 28, that's a sign of rotation, ventral displacement of the phalanx within the hoof capsule. And obviously monitoring just the horse's palmar angle. So again, if there's consistent radiographic technique, that number, if the horse is rotating, will change. It will increase. And again, we could fight over what is the normal palmar angle for a horse. I think we all fall somewhere in between 0 and 10. But is there any point in fighting over 3 to 5? No, it's just you want to get an appropriate palmar angle for this horse, and knowing that the flatter the horse's palmar angle is, the more uniform loading of the distal phalanx you have. So sometimes we will rob Peter to pay Paul. Okay, so sometimes we'll try to get to a 0 degree palmar angle to get as much uniform loading throughout the entire bottom or distal surface of the distal phalanx to protect the lamellar interface, even though we would all agree it may not be best for the navicular apparatus. So it wouldn't be uncommon to try to achieve a very flat palmar angle in a horse that's suffering from laminitis to just get more uniform loading for a period of time. The ultimate end goal is to achieve the normal palmar angle for this horse over its lifetime. But in acute laminitis, if you see that number increasing, obviously it's a sign of rotation. Okay? And then obviously looking at the horse's base of support, then eventually it's toe lever. So again, a lot of time is spent on this little measurement. So from dorsodistal tip of the distal phalanx, wherever the horse breaks over. That's commonly a measurement that is fought over. And again, I would tell you, nobody knows exactly what that measurement should be. That's not been clearly defined. But we do know that the closer you get to the dorsodistal margin of the distal phalanx, the less stress or strain you place on ulnar interface at breakover. But I would argue that the same measurement should be taken from this tip of the distal phalanx to wherever it breaks over on the medial and lateral sides of it as well. So if you're going to sit and worry about it in the lateral plane, I think you need to worry about it all the way around the horse's whole capsule. Because again, in my experience, the acute laminatics I work on don't spend a lot of time walking in a straight line. Spend a lot of time going from their water to their food, and turning in their stall. So I think that lever is very important to note, especially if you're going to sit and worry about this one to an extreme point. Yes, ma'am.
If you're working on the person with the laminitis, you get a lot of men sitting on all the ready, but if the heel is raised, so you want the like he's trying to get you to raise the heel, and there's no way that you right and bring it back. But again, I found that because the place when they can go down, it was on right close to zero, they do better. And you get the type of mix all the time, they want to just go forward, raise the heel, and it's like it's such a life that they're sitting there, argue with you about it. And some areas I read, when you have the person that is too high, that it causes ready wants to get healed first, and that's because actually problem blood flow. So we kind of, what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, so the question is obviously there is that the little ultimate that picture I showed through the wedging for laminatics obviously probably causes a lot of conflict just in the vet farrier community. Let's be honest. There's a lot of conflict between vet and vet about is that appropriate? Is that something that should be utilized? Okay, there's a lot of argument there. There's a lot of argument in the farrier world on either side of it. And I would tell you, if you find yourself in a vet farrier team and one is strongly pro and one is strongly con, somebody needs to excuse themselves from that relationship. That's just a fighting battle. You're already in for a shit show. Like it's already a fight. That's not good. But it should be you and the vet fighting laminitis to help the horse. There's no sense in fighting amongst yourself. So if you find yourself at an impasse, somebody you just can't work with, then there's nothing wrong with excusing yourself from that situation. Because again, it's not something I do a lot of, and I'm probably not the best suited for it. I'm not giving that horse its best chance. I'm not a person that uses the extreme wedges, the big rails. That's not something I do. So if I'm stuck with a vet that is strongly for that, and that's the chosen path, then I'm doing the horse the disservice by being a part of that team and trying to either half-ass it and do my best, or worse yet, is passively fighting and being passive aggressive and just kind of trying to get through it. So I would tell you first and foremost, for the horse's just well-being, you need to pair the two. Does that make sense? Would anybody argue with that? Like you might lose a horse, you might, have some issues, you might have your feelings hurt because the vet won or that horse owner won. But I just think that's the best for the horse. And ultimately I think it's better for everybody in the relationship. There's no point in being enemies, no point in fighting. I know sometimes it's harder to say do those things, but I think that's what should be done. The argument for them is that it should decrease tension on the dorsal lamellar interface from just tension of the deep distal flexion. Okay, that's it. That may help, may not. All right. So my personal belief is that it probably increases the shear force on the lamellar interface, and again, it causes a straight up point down of the distal phalanx. And I think everybody in here that's done many horses with flexural limb deformities, that club foot, the one that's really markedly upright, we know that foot needs a lot more sole depth than any other foot to stay comfortable, right? So a flat foot can stay comfortable with less sole depth than that straight up and down. Okay, so again, I think that right there lends itself to a lot of problems in treating laminitis. If you don't have sufficient sole depth and you want to increase it, we know that increases pressure over
the dorsodistal margin, the distal phalanx through the hoof capsule. Same thing occurs when you start extremely dressing back the horse's hoof capsule. So as you start dressing back the dorsal hoof wall, you increase stress and strain or load over the toe of the hoof capsule or right under the dorsodistal margin of the distal phalanx. Okay? So again, I think the correct answer, or what my thoughts on it are, is to think that way and be very critical of the scenario you're in and that horse and that particular day and that snapshot. And then right or wrong, sometimes we do just have to make a decision and kick on with it. We're going to commit to one or the other. Right? But the idea of what it does for leaving a horse with too much heel, you mean just from the wedging, or you mean you're trying to leave heel on the laminated hoof capsule to artificially get them more upright?
Yeah, they don't let you, they don't let you, your experience kind of determine like we know, the way to go. So they want to go, just they heard that's the way to go.
Yeah, just leave all the heel and keep wedging over
Once you
time.
get the toe back, there's a toe way back, and you're saying, you can't take too much toe, you know, that's support everything.
Yeah.
Before you did it, let's support it, that's what's trying to drop down.
Yeah.
You're trying to argue, but you can't take the toe, you can't take the heel, you got to balance it out. And it's like, they're not educated, basically, it's some areas I've worked with on everything, they just learn it one way.
Yeah.
And that's why it's been good to see what you're saying, because you can actually talk about that more and explain.
No, I mean, I think that's something you need to do. There is a time and a place for everything. So the more educated you make yourself and the more you can articulately communicate with a person, explain your stances, have a reason as to why you want to do something, the better off you are. You know, again, I think with that ultimate, that's an artificial wedge that's put on, and I could get behind that or I couldn't. It depends on the situation. But I don't think there's any way I could rationalize leaving a lot of heel on the laminate. Okay, so for the overall health of the hoof capsule, we all know that if you start leaving just heel stag, the back half of the foot doesn't function normally. It moves the frog further from the ground, so you're not recruiting it into load bearing as much. So I do think you have to be judicious with lowering the heel. So obviously, every bit you lower the heel, the more tension you put on the deep digital flexor tip. So there does come a point where you can lower it too far and cause the horse discomfort by increasing stress and strain on the deep digital flexor. There is that point, but I do think not that you need to find that point and that you're out trying to lame horses, but I think, you know, in reality, if you're managing, we'll get into it a lot with the chronic limbitic, but if you're managing chronic limbitic for 10 years, I think you need to identify where that point is, because we all would all agree we'd like to achieve a normal placement of the distal phalanx in relation to the ground, if we can. But, you know, what a chronic limbitic at 3 years in may tolerate you doing may be quite a bit different than what it'll handle as a 20-year-old. Okay? So there are some that, you know, you simply just can't lower them at all. They live in this, you know, chronic state of a palmar angle of 10 to 15 degrees. You know? But before they progress too far, before all their other tissues not adhere, but become accustomed to being in a particular stance. Because it's not just one lamellar interface, or like one lamella and one deep digital flexor tendon fighting each other. There's a lot of other attachments, a lot of other tissues, a lot of other fascias associated with it. So you can't just go drop it. Does that make sense? So there's no real black or white answer. And again, that's why I tell you to think in terms of principles and have a clear plan and justification for it. And then as a team, make the best decision possible. Yes, sir.
When you were talking about, you know, our dorsal wall and how much effect we can have on it, on several occasions I've had doctors ask me, not a month, and on a wedge. So it isn't like a resection, but it's either that color wedge, dorsal wall. There's some benefits to it. Your experience,
Benefits to dressing it back?
dressing it back aggressively.
Aggressive. Okay,
Not
so,
to the point of a
so,
resection, but
yeah.
you know, the negatives, we don't know. Don't they push it low mass, that far away?
Yeah, no, so the question is, what are the pros and cons for dressing the dorsal hoof wall? Okay, and so I guess if we could all agree we would like to have a matched dorsal surface of the hoof wall and a dorsal surface of the distal family. That's great, right? We'd all be happy. We think that's what promotes more uniform and more normal growth, right? So if it can be achieved, great. Okay? The problems to overdoing it and doing it at the wrong time is that you can cause a lot of discomfort. So when we get to chronic laminitis, you know, hell, I'll show you horses that people just have never dressed back, and I'll just hammer it back, just kick on through it, dress it all the way back. The problem is in the acute phase. So they're basically just sitting there, a little teetering, and any little thing can send them over the edge. So me personally, and you know, and sometimes I get accused of pussyfooting around it, but in these acute cases, I think you're better off to just let it alone. You know, obviously if there's extreme things, so let's say, you know, little pony comes in, it's curled up and it's in the acute phase, then yes, you got to hammer something off. If this one comes in an acute phase, you know, and it's a little off on the dorsal wall versus the dorsal surface of the distal family, am I going to worry about taking the time to dress it back, put it up on the little stand, hammer it back, just go put my body through that, let the horse do that anymore? No. I used to be one that would try everything in the world. So I'd spend hours making these hard bars to put on there. I'd spend hours tearing apart, you know, the old Mustad Easy glue shoes, cutting tabs off, rewelding them around, gluing them on there. So I went through the process of putting clogs on all these things. I put all these things on there, and then the thing crashed tomorrow. Okay, then what gets blamed? The shoe. And inevitably, you do have to look at it critically. Did something with that shoe hurt that horse? Maybe. Did the sheer act of doing it? Maybe. Did the sheer act of dressing the dorsal wall back do it? Maybe. Okay. But if it's in that acute phase, you know, again, I think it's best to, if you can get the shoes off if they need to come off. If it's a poor shoe job, if it's got a lot of fluid, if it's really suspended from it, get them off. And then recruit the frog and sole into load bearing somehow. So stand stall, soft ride boot, pressure material taken in there, something, and then step back. I let it, again, right or wrong, I let it become nothing but the vet issue or their case from now. And so I'll admit, me and us in our service at the school don't like shoeing horses in the acute laminitic phase. Because again, if that horse crashes tomorrow in a soft ride, nobody ever blames the soft ride. Nobody ever wonders, was it the soft ride? Nobody put their body through 3 hours of trying to trim and shoe this thing. Okay, so maybe it's heartless, maybe it's not. But I think in my experience and the way we treat these cases now is they're going to come in, go in a boot, and then right or wrong, they're going to live or die. You know, because again, we all know half live and die seeming to be regardless of what you do to it. So first they got to show that they will live, they got to stabilize, and they got to start to grow some semblance of a hoof capsule. And then start working. Okay, and so, you know, as a farrier, do you get any glory, any hero, any like great pat on the back? Oh my God, you saved this horse? No. So let's soft ride the boot, take that credit. And soft ride the boot can take credit when it doesn't go well too. Okay? And that being said, that's probably the thing we do the most, because again, in the acute phase, I think simply by pulling a horse up on a hoof stand and just hammering it back, that can send them over the edge. I think, you know, the 3-hour process to get a shoe on it can send them over the edge. I think, honestly, anything can send them over the edge. So the least amount of variables you can add to that equation seems to be smartest to me. And that being said, there are times in the acute laminitic phase where you will do something. So we'll talk about a couple of things that we will do or go through. Okay. But does that answer your question? Okay. So if you in chronic laminitis, I'm pretty quick to just hammer it back. Because again, I think when you do have in a chronic laminitic phase, I'll show you some of these malformed hoof capsules. I do think that predisposes them to abnormal growth of the horse's hoof capsule. And then again, in chronic laminitis, I would tell you once everything else is addressed, it's usually the secondary complications that are the nightmare, the abscesses and the uncontrollable white line disease. And so the more toe lever you have, the more lamellar wedge you have, the more distorted the outside of the horse's hoof capsule is, the more it's predisposed to the white line disease, which seems to be, you know, the epitome of the fight for me. Like I can do everything else, but oftentimes the white line disease, I mean, hell, you can get to a point where it's borderline uncontrollable sometimes. And so we'll talk about all those things. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I got a couple things. First, on the dressing the wall back, like, so a normal horse is at 100% ability to bear his weight on the wall, and then he's got acute laminitis, and maybe he's lost about 50%. If you
Yeah.
knock the wall
And you
off,
start taking this off, yeah, you can take away part of that percentage.
Yeah.
And you never know if you are or not, but it's rolling the dice.
But then I think where a lot of people get, I've worked with some of these guys who are pretty good at doing some of Rick's techniques, and I've kind of learned what is good in his stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it's good. And
Yeah.
So say you got 70% damage, right?
Yeah.
Now you got this big lever out in front.
Yeah.
That's what they kick it up, so that doesn't become the lever anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They still got 30% ability.
Yeah.
Right? And yes, in turn, by dropping your fetlock, you're reducing the stress on, or the pull on the flexor tendon, right?
Yeah.
And I don't even know if that's really what they're going for there.
Yeah.
I think what they're going for is kicking it up, getting that gets that toe lever away without taking it off.
Yeah, no, so obviously the steeper it gets, the more your lever goes from this
Right.
to this.
So,
And
and
so
then they're
they'll even buy it.
and the other thing I see by doing that is when you do a videogram before and after, the
And
amount of blood
the
supply,
wedges.
the amount of blood supply you get back.
Yep.
I thought, like, but I'm still, like, for me, I'm still a heart bar guy. The only thing I wanted to ask you about, like, so you try and get them to zero, right? You
No, I'm just saying that does probably distribute the load over the greatest surface area.
But my point being, so what my question for that, when you were saying, but wouldn't that be putting your tendon at its maximum tension?
Good. There's constantly Robert Peter to pick Paul. There's a give and take everywhere.
Right. That's all.
And I'll admit, I don't think any of us have hard and fast gold standard answers. If we did, I'd be standing up here telling you exactly this is what you should do, and we'd all walk out and do it, and we would eliminate the disease. So again, a lot of this is trying to assess the situation as best you can and make the most educated yes you can.
Let me ask you this about.
Yeah.
I do see, like, when you do kick one up
Mhm.
that way, I see in the quarters.
They did, yeah. No, so I mean, it was proven. I can't remember if it was in the mid-90s or late 90s, but Silverman and his group proved that if you wedge a horse's hoof capsule, it increases tension on the medial side of the horse's hoof.
Yeah, they always.
So it's very common if you start taking, like you take that flat-footed thoroughbred, and it's in the acute phase and it's teetering, from experience, I can tell you wedge it up, they drop me in a heartbeat. I mean, was it shown in like hard and fast scientific process information, like a study that just could not be argued? No. Is it like the gold standard study? No. But it was shown, and again, clinically, anecdotally, I've seen it, and anyway.
Is it just because
Show it.
the center is mass is the center? And we take it off the toe so they go this direction?
Yeah, so I mean, if you've got, let's say you've got your center of pressure is usually medial toe, and you wedge it, it moves, it can move. And again, like there was, the studies again from the late 90s that are kind of coming back into light now with the whole like sideways lateral ligament shoes. There have been people that mapped out the center of pressure in relation to hoof angles from wedges from the heel, lateral, medial, and some of them are very predictable and go in certain places. Okay, and then you can switch up the horse type, the horse conformation, did the exact same thing, and the center of pressure moves somewhere else. Okay, so again, it's not like this nice, hard, and fast thing, but I would tell you from my experience, I get a little concerned wedging up those flat and thoroughbred type feet because they often will sink medially. So if you combine that with like a base wide stance, various angular rotational limb deformities, I think we can do them a disservice to do it. But like I said, for the extreme, like the club foot that's becoming laminitic or that flexural limb deformity, I could certainly make the argument. And like you were saying, sometimes when you take venograms to that wedge versus no wedge, and the wedge allows for better vascular perfusion, I'd make the argument, I'll show you a venogram later, you cut the tendon and derotate the horse's hoof capsule, get zero on it, it's a better
Oh yeah, you
better
get
thing.
those.
So it's, I don't think there are any right or wrong answers per se. Again, I think the team should get together, look at the situation, and just come up with the best solution. I think the biggest problem occurs when you've got somebody that is pro this and somebody that's not. That's when I think it kind of goes wrong. I think you gotta get the right teammate or be the right teammate.
In both of those, though, it's the deep flexor.
Oh, the deep digital flexor tendon is a huge problem in laminated. The horse's weight is a huge problem, and then the horse's hoof capsule is a huge problem. So if we could just take off the horse's hoof capsule, teach it to lay down for a year, hang out and watch Netflix, we wouldn't have to worry about laminitis at all, right? So we've got three things there we're trying to fight, and nobody has the best way to fight. Make sense? Sound good? All right. So we'll keep moving. So again, a DP radiograph, and know that just like this one, the positioning of the horse, that can be markedly changed. So getting into where you're looking at the finite millimeter and trying to guide your trimming and shoeing, I think is probably a waste of time. Just look at the big picture. Same thing medially and laterally. If this is 1 millimeter off based on this radiograph in this particular position, I think if it's standing on a block like this, that can change versus like this. So sitting and fretting over 1 millimeter is probably a bad thing, but if you look at this thing and it's progressively rotating or sinking medially or laterally, I think that's the big picture you're trying to determine. What is it moving? What is the general position of the distal phalanx within the hoof capsule? Okay, and then just like I said, we'll talk about the deep digital flexor tenotomies and derotational shoes. So again, in horses that are demonstrating progressive ventral rotation of the distal phalanx, it's not uncommon to cut their deep digital flexor tendon. So they just won't stabilize. They keep rotating, they keep rotating, they keep rotating. The deep digital flexor tenotomy is something that can be done. So when you have minimal sole depth, an extreme palmar angle, and a displaced distal phalanx within the hoof capsule, it's not uncommon to cut the deep digital flexor tendon. And so we can go through all that, but it really doesn't matter to us. If that's going to do it, we need to know what to do to derotate. So from a farrier standpoint, you'd like to lower the yield as much as possible, but you will often, if not always, end up with a two-plane type turn. Okay, so you're going to have a toe, and then you're going to lower the yield as best you possibly can. Okay, and I'll tell you from eyeballing these things yourselves, you can try to use radiographs to guide it, but in reality, I think the easiest way I've tried to map it out is just simply looking at the plane of the frog itself and trying to match that with your heels in the trims. Okay, so we'll lower them as much as we can, and then that's going to be our new plane. So all of this is basically going to be a reverse wedge. So they cut the deep digital flexor tendon. We're trying to get down to a near flat, but maybe slightly positive palmar angle. The flatter you go, the more likely the distal phalanx is to subluxate. It's going to subluxate slightly regardless, but the flatter you get, the more likely it is to progressively subluxate. Okay, so we're shooting for slight positive. Okay, so we're going to lower the heel as much as we can. We're going to take an egg bar, fitting it as full and long as we possibly can. So when you cut the deep digital flexor tendon, you really need a lever in the back to keep it from just toe throwing. So we're going for distance out the back, and then we're going to try to recruit the frog and sole into low grade. And you can do it any number of ways. You can do it with open toe egg bars, you can do it with hard bars, you can do it with heel plates, you can do it with X back, you can build up wedges with glue and polymethylates. You can do any number of things. This is just one way to do it. Okay, so you can see the length of the egg bar that we're going with, and you can almost argue that that's a little short. We'd like to have a nice big extension out of the back. And again, people argue about this all the time. Should you have a closed toe or should you have an open toe? And I think you should reduce the lever, but yeah, I mean the deep's cut, so the moment of breakover, how much stress and strain going through the lamellar interface anyway, who knows? So I like to leave it there as a big protecting thing. But when you look at this radiograph, the source has no sole depth, so we're going to reverse it and get it off the ground some. But I still think it's a good idea to have that piece of metal there to protect it. You'll see there won't be impression material there. Okay, so obviously I think we may glue up a horse this afternoon, but we'll go through the prep process. Obviously just prep the outer hoof wall, buff it after everything's done. Then you can take your two-part impression materials, and they're nice to make a reverse wedge out of. It's not too firm, not too committal, just yet, so it's soft enough that you can push it and manipulate your angle to your eye. But let's be honest, it's your best guess. I don't have a nice scientific way to tell you how to do this. So it's two-part impression material. Everybody use this? Okay, all right. So you take the 2 parts, equal parts, mix them together. You can add copper sulfate to them if your heart desires. The 2 equal size quantities, mix them together as vigorously as you possibly can to get a nice bond. And I tell you, if you can trim your heels to a flat plane and you get your shoe to that flat plane, it makes it easier to line it up. Okay? If you can't get to a flat plane and you end up having to use impression material to de-rotate it, it can be a little difficult to make it nice and level and make it really, really stable. But we'll push in our impression material, and again, you want plenty of the frog, but you don't. Normally, in most feet, when we're packing them, we put a lot around the frog and we get out towards the sole. Now, I tell you, just for me, that's a hard muscle memory to fight. I want to leave it thick at the toe and thin at the frog, but that's what we're going for here. Okay, so then we'll press the shoe down as flat against the heels as we possibly can, and then trying to create that reverse wedge that we're open to go for. Okay, so if it slides forward on you, slide it back. Okay, but every time you push it down, it's going to want to keep moving more and more forward. Okay, so that's the biggest fight. And then again, us as farriers, it's a hard thing to put giant extensions out the back. You want to make everything look normal and push it, but nothing's normal. So keep pushing it back as far as you can. Okay, and then again, I think it's a good idea to leave this protector here, but not beyond the dorsal surface of the distal of the horse's hoof capsule. And then we're going to take these little, basically tabs made out of fabric. So you can do it with fiberglass if you want, polyester, Vectorman, Covercycle, any of the polymeric fabrics. Just saturate them with any of the polymethyl methacrylates like Ecolox, Ecobond, Polyflex, any of the glues. Mix them together, saturate them, and then lay them half on the shoe and half on the horse's hoof wall. Okay? So we're going to take our fabrics, and the way to do that is stack them so you'll cut them to whatever shape you need. Okay? You'll have 2, 3, 4, however many of them you choose that you need to have. Saturate them with your glue on all sides. Stack them. I go as far as to roll them pretty flat, because again, the strength comes from your fabric, not from the glue. So you want just enough glue to set everything up, hold it up, but you want the strength of the fabric and the braid itself. Okay, so when you press it onto the horse's hoof capsule, wrap it up, then let it set up. This is what you end up with. So again, it doesn't take an extreme reverse wedge to do it. If you can get a lot of it done with the trim. Okay? But you should have a gap in the toe, and again, you should have a fairly secure shoe for a horse living in a stall. Okay? But again, you can see how the edges all the way around are rolled up, and I think that's just as important as worrying about the toe. Just make it easy to turn in any direction. The front would be open. Obviously, most of them are penetrated or drained, and that area needs to be treated to open everything up as best you can so it can be treated. Okay? And when you radiograph them, this is what it looks like. So again, you de-rotated it, got close to zero, and then you ask yourself why do you go through all this? And it's for the vascular perfusion. Okay, so this is a horse free digital flexor tenotomy derotational shoe, and you can see there's basically no vascular perfusion through the dorsal hoof hole, the dorsal lamellar interface, and then you simply cut it, derotate it, and this one had to be grooved and have a partial resection as well, but you can see vascular perfusion return. So that's the goal. A horse living like this isn't going to, the prognosis for survival is obviously very, very guarded. Okay? And this prognosis for growing any semblance of a hoof capsule in the toe is near impossible. Yes, sir.
Why does this vascular perfusion return? Was it pinching like circumflex?
Yep, so right down here, I don't know how well this shows up in here in the daylight, but at the dorsodistal margin of the distal phalanx, you can see, the circumflex. All right, so most of the vascular to the horse's hoof comes down the back of the leg, under the bone, and then up, right? Okay, so when this is displaced, often the circumflex artery is torn or compressed. Okay, and then as the horse sinks, it also sinks and compresses the coronary plexus as well.
Okay, so it pinches them both off, right? So when you derotate them, get them out of their own weight, the vascular perfusion can return to the bottom, and then the coronary plexus, as this horse is a market sinker as well. So like right here is the coronary vein. You can see where the extensor process is, right? So it's sunk a lot. So you've got, the whole bony column goes through it, the skin, everything. And then basically the horse's hoof capsule is a big tourniquet. It's hitting it, it's pinching it, it's compressing it. So that's the reason you see this big gap right here. So that portion of the horse's hoof wall is cut, peeled away as well, along with the derotation. But it's basically, that's why I say the hoof capsule is the problem. If you just take it off, you wouldn't have any of these vascular problems and concerns. How the horse would stand, how the horse is going to live, that's obviously a big question, a big issue. But the hoof capsule itself is a rigid thing that causes a lot of problems when the bony column starts moving within the hoof capsule.
Were these x-rays taken the same day?
No. So I wish it was, and that would be awesome to be able to show that nice before and after, but they're...
Yeah, I didn't think it was because it looks like we got a lot of soul growth under the coffin.
Yeah, there is some soul growth, like right from here to there, but it's not much. Most of that is the impression material, and so unfortunately the dates are cropped off of it, but it's probably 4 weeks apart, 4 to 6 weeks apart. So the vasculature, it returns fairly quickly. It's not just like, the nice tourniquet, it's on, and you take it off, and it runs back. That doesn't quite occur. Okay. But any questions on that, how, or why? Yes, ma'am.
Do you see much contraction of the heels when you do this patient and having problems contracting on you?
Okay, so the question is, do you see any problems, or have I experienced contracted heels from this process? And I would say no. I just haven't seen it. But say that it couldn't. I don't know. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll move on again. It's one of those things, the deep digital flexure anatomy, that a lot of people argue over whether it worked or whether it didn't work. Okay, and so if you cut it, it worked. Like the surgery was done, it was performed. You could derotate. If the horse doesn't live, it's not necessarily the anatomy's fault. So there are obviously times and cases where survival is markedly improved. If you do a deep digital flexor anatomy when there's no bone disease, no penetration, and no sinking, obviously the percentage of survival goes up. When a horse is sinking, the survival rate goes way down. Right? I mean, the deep digital flexor anatomy, what's it doing for sinking? Not much, but maybe it takes away some pull, and then again, nobody clearly knows. Just like Brian was saying, talking about 70% of the dorsolamellar interface is supportive or it's compromised. Nobody knows what it takes to hold one up, and it's likely different per environment, per horse, per body weight, per everything. Okay, so nobody knows, and so if we can, even when they're sinking, you could rationalize the deep digital flexor anatomy by trying to change that equilibrium, by trying to take away some of the pull of the deep digital flexor tendon, and now maybe instead of having to have 50% of the lamellar interface supported, maybe 47% can do it. You never know. So that's probably likely one of the reasons why you have some live and some die, regardless. Okay? And then, as we know, it's just a terrible disease. And so once you have severe bone disease or solar penetration, extreme sinking, the prognosis just goes way down. And even when you have a horse survive, it wasn't a nice, easy thing. So these horses go through a lot of pain and a very lengthy, time-consuming process for not only the vet farrier team, but also the caretakers of the horse. So there is a big emotional toll and a physical toll, and obviously a market financial toll placed on those people. Okay, is there any questions there? Nothing? All right, so we talked about, again, in the acute phase, another thing you might see is, coronary vein grooving or dorsal hoof wall grooving, and then ultimately coronary vein resections. Okay, so that's something I think is a farrier very likely to see, and I'll tell you, you're doing it with a vet farrier team. But when you have a nice ledge like that, that horse is sinking. And so just like we were talking about, how does the vasculature return or what's happening to the vasculature? So when this horse is sinking and has that ledge, you can bet that the coronary plexus is compressed. Okay? So the thought process is by coming down 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters and thinning the horse's hoof wall through the area of that ledge, you can thin it enough that it will bend and flex and not compress the vasculature. That's the thought process. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. So that horse, that sinking ledge, got grooved and here he is. So it doesn't always work. Okay? But when you're doing it, again, just like I showed you earlier, if you can do it while the horses are laying down, that's great. Anything you can do while they're lying down. Okay? And then there are some tools that make it very easy. So the dermal tools make it very easy to do this in a horse that's lying down. I tell you from a farrier standpoint, if you're going to do this to a horse that's standing up, the side of a rasp on a hoof stand works really well and really quickly to solve that. For the vets, it's going to take them a while to get through it, so the Dremel is something to use. But you can certainly rough it in with a rasp really, really quickly and then finish it off with a Dremel. Okay? And these little burrs work great to do that. They're very cheap, but they're a carbide cross-cut burr. And so they actually cut the horse's hoof wall away and throw it out of the leg. Okay, so it doesn't have the heat build up, and it doesn't have the dust build up. I mean, you can see this little guy. I mean, it's very easy to see down in there. It's not building up a big amount of dust and a big amount of heat like the drum sanders would. Okay, so cutting it away makes it pretty easy. Okay, and so again, when they sink, this is what you're hoping to relieve. So hopefully you thin this enough that this can push out. Okay, the reason not to do it at the top is obviously that's very thin, and it doesn't take much to get into the dermis or the coronary band itself. So you want to get below where the coronary cushion is or the coronary dermis, okay? But knowing that as the horse sinks, that moves down. Okay? So the more it sinks, the further down you may have to go. But that's the goal. You're hoping to relieve compression right here. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So now we'll take it one step further. So after they sink, and if it's compressed for a period of time, they get what's called a shear lesion. So meaning that the horse's hoof and the skin have separated. Okay? So that's from an ischemic phenomenon that you can bet is a lack of blood flow. And so that's when you change from just grooving to resection. Okay, so you'll basically, where the shear lesion is, then it shows you where it's going to be, right? So you'll come 1.5 centimeters below, roughly, okay, and make a smiley face. Okay, so with your Dremel, you'll cut up to it on either side, and then it will peel away. Okay, so this is a resection done on a horse without a tourniquet on. It's not bleeding. That's been compressed for that period of time to make that shear lesion. So the hope is to peel it off so vascular perfusion can return. So you can, everywhere where it is separated, it will peel very, very easy. Okay? The last little attached piece may hemorrhage slightly. So you could argue we went maybe a hair too far, maybe we should just cut up right through there, but you're better off to get to healthy margins, right? Okay, and you ask yourself, well, what happens when you do that? So this horse and that horse are the exact same, and you can see where the resection was done, and you can see how quick it even outgrows the other side of the horse's hoof. Okay? And so at that point, you have to be very cognizant, very diligent at using radiographs to guide trimming and shoeing to make sure you don't get some uncontrolled or secondary capsular rotation. By having the one side outgrow the other, you could have a distal phalanx twist within the hoof capsule itself. So it's very important to monitor, growth rings and use radiographs to guide trimming and shoeing to a certain extent. Okay? Does that make sense? So obviously when this is done, this is lightly bandaged, it's all in hospital setting. And again, just the disclaimer, I'm obviously not advocating that farriers just blindly go out and start doing this, right? But it's something you may very well be a part of, because this is right when the line gets blurry. What's the difference between the dermis and the horse's hoof capsule? So this is a team approach. Again, I don't think there's any sense in sitting there fighting over, well, shit, who's going to push the trigger on the dermis? Work together
and just get it done for the well-being of the horse. Okay. Sound good? That's a good time to stop and ask any questions on acute laminitis. Go back to the part numbers on the drum. One of these days, I'm just going to get a pocket full and start selling them for $20 a piece. So they're like $6 from this place. Oh, and just again, I'm a pretty cheap person anyway, but they'll ask you if you want to pay 50% more to have some fancy coating on there. I tried it, doesn't make it any difference. Don't spend the extra 50%.
When they're displaced, you all get approval?
When they're displaced, so when they sink like that,
Yeah. Normally I'll like,
we do a lot, but again, that's not that it's a roll of the dice, but that's a best guess call. And again, somebody just has to make that decision. Are we going to do it or not? And so one of the advocates for it is obviously, what does it do? Can it hurt the horse? Probably. Might it help? Yes. So I tend to probably lean more towards yes than no. But again, once you can sit and kind of hem and haw for a day or two, and then you'll have your answer when that shows up. And that's an extreme one. So again, that's a big shear lesion. That's somebody didn't pull the trigger quick. Okay? But when you're examining these horses, again, it's not uncommon. I'm showing you that's the same horse. So they usually have hair like this. And so you're remiss not every day to lift up the hair, or clip the hair, and then actually look and inspect the horse's coronary band. So feeling it, palpating it, looking for a thin line. Like a thin line will appear before that appears. And you'd like to catch it earlier than later, right? But again, I think people being astute and monitoring it from the farrier, the vet techs, the vet nurse, the horse owner, these laminitis need to be monitored, assessed very, very frequently. They're not cases that you just say, we'll see you in 6 weeks. You want somebody consistently looking at it. But I'd say we're probably pretty quick to do it. Could it hurt? It makes nailing hell later down the road. But yeah, just drive all the way through. But that, in my experience, is the only problem. There comes a day, and again, with horse owners, by the time you get to this point, their pocketbook's a little strapped. They don't necessarily remember all the bad stuff. So when this is going in, and maybe it's just me being crazy, but I make a point to say, well, at some point, nailing may become very difficult in this horse. If the goal is to get back to shoes. I mean, hell, for all I know, this horse may do nothing, just live in a paddock forever, or they might be trying to get back to trail riding. And at this point, maybe it could go for a little hack. I don't know. I mean, a smart person would probably say they'd like to get everything grown out, all the lamellar damage grown out, get a year. But we all know horse owners are only so patient. But it can make nailing difficult. But there's always boots. So, any questions on acute laminitis? All right, who's running this show? Because I think I'm way over time. But do I just keep rolling?
You're good. You're at a little over an hour right now.
30, but we've only covered half of it. Do I just keep rolling? All right. Anybody need coffee, food? And again, I don't think it's rude if you need to get up and go to the bathroom, get food, do whatever as we roll through. All right. So obviously that's all acute laminitis, and that's a lot. Okay. But I would tell you that managing chronic laminitis is probably one of the most common things I do and we see at the vet school. I think it's a big issue. And again, my party line has got to be prevention is key. And so, a study was done by the USDA in 2000. Hopefully it's being repeated now, but another one was done in the UK in 2013 that showed similar results. And basically what the two studies show is that 50% of laminitis cases are pasture-associated laminitis cases. Right? And so I would tell you, we all think of the grain overload ponies, and then the colics or the diarrheas or the taint centers, atomic horse fevers or enteritis, or all these things that result in laminitis.
but it has been shown that just simple pasture-associated laminitis accounts for half of all laminitis cases, roughly. Okay, and so I tell you, prevention is the key, and pasture-associated laminitis has two giant risk factors associated with it. So we've all had horses go out on the exact same pasture, one became laminitic and one didn't, right? So it's just like, you take the nice fit 100-pound kid, that's 14 years old, lady meat at McDonald's every day, probably not going to have a heart attack. Take a 70-year-old man that weighs 400 pounds, eats McDonald's every day, he's much more likely to have a heart attack, right? So obesity is the same problem, and the endocrine disorders. So this horse, at a body condition score of 9, you put it out on a pasture, it's going to be far more susceptible to pasture-associated laminitis than this horse. And so just maintaining a horse at an appropriate body condition score should roughly eliminate half of all laminitis cases. Okay? Because when they're obese, they tend to be hyperinsulinic as well, meaning they have more insulin within their body. Insulin itself can cause laminitis. Insulin itself causes increased mitotic activity of the epidermal basal cells, causes a lengthening of the secondary epidermal belly, which causes a mechanical weakening of it, which again predisposes a horse to failure or to laminitis. Okay, so as farriers, again, we see these horses far more often than the vets do. So if they're only out there twice a year, a horse can get from this to that really quickly. It's pretty hard for them to get from that to this in the time we see them if they're on a 4 to 6 week cycle. And again, it's not a fun, pleasant conversation to try to tell somebody their horse is fat. So I usually just ease on out of it, go back to school, tell the vet the horse is fat. They go out there and have that conversation with them. Because again, no horse owner likes to hear it. Okay? But if they've already had one bout of laminitis and they're staying this overweight, you're just playing with fire. You're just asking for trouble. But I do think it is a disservice to just keep working on this horse. And we know when the problem's starting to occur. Let's be honest. We're trimming this horse and it's fat. We've all seen the feet slowly deteriorate. And you come back and you're like, damn, I know I hammered that back. I know I made that look perfect. And now it just bulges out and looks like crap. That's it. It's coming. So especially if you don't say something then it's a big problem. If you still got the normal foot and the horse is just getting fat, I kind of get it. That's not a fun conversation to have, but you can always kick it over to somebody else. Let the vet go get on. But again, the owners, they forget the destruction, the problems they had the first time. Because again, horse owners like to see that horse much more than this one. But this is markedly more safe. Okay. So good. So any questions on that? So that's just my little disclaimer at first. If you can prevent it, that's ultimately best.
So now, not just with obesity, but how much of an effect does other disease like Cushing's have?
Yeah. So we kind of skipped it. So again, the two risk factors are obesity and endocrine disorders. So endocrine disorders is PPID or the Cushing component. So what happens is, obviously, without just going into it in an extreme way, is that endocrine or horses with PPID or endocrine disorders or equine metabolic syndrome, whatever you want to call it, they are most commonly hyperinsulinemic or insulin resistant as well. Okay, so just like obesity, it's just another risk factor. But you can have a normal weight horse, it's still PPID, and if that's uncontrolled, you can still have a hyperinsulinemic horse, you can still have the same problem and have the horse look like that. But from a farrier standpoint, again, we're not the one taking ACT, we're not the one taking basal influence, we're not monitoring any of that. So I do tend to skip over that pretty quick, but you do notice things as the farrier. So if their hair coat fits friggin' July and their hair still looks like mine, it's time to have it rechecked, reassessed. Make sure it's on the right medicine, make sure it's at the right level. But again, that's the vet's job. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with mentioning that to the owner, or when you run into the vet and say, hey, you remember Chubby last time we worked on him? He's starting to get fat again, or he's not shedding out at all this year. Or, I'm just a little worried about him. And because they can always call up the owner and have a conversation, check in, see how Chucky's doing, and then go out and look at him or see him. Okay, so communication to a certain degree is huge, and if you can prevent it, you're far better off than just dealing with the aftermath. That sound good? But I'll admit, I do firmly believe that's part of our job to a certain extent, is to look at it, and not speaking up, not saying something is just as bad as doing it, I think. When you see it coming, it's just like, one of these little kids runs out in the street, and one of us just going to sit back and watch. Like, you're going to try to grab it. So if you see the disaster coming, I think it's in your best interest to say something. Okay? So again, just like with the acute laminitis, there are any number of different specific techniques. But these are the principles I think you're trying to achieve. So again, we want to reduce stress and strain on the dorsal or on the lamellar interface. So again, recruiting the frog and sole into load bearing and monitoring the deep digital flexor tendon. Okay, so obviously that can be done with wedges or heel elevation. And we'd like to ease movement again in all different directions, not just break over, but easing it all different directions. We'd like to align the whole capsule around the distal phalanx again. So that's back where we start talking about the lamellar wedge and the extreme distortions. And then what I think is one of the hardest things is managing these secondary complications, so that the abscesses and the white line disease that these horses are prone to, I think is quite difficult, and often, the worst part about the whole thing to me. And then the techniques are probably shared decisions, and I say that not mean that farriers should just bow down and do whatever the vet wants to do. Okay, but I think everybody should probably have a say. Again, I'm the one who's got a nail to shoe on, so I want probably a little bit more to say than anybody else. But when I say shared, it's often forgotten the owner as well. So the owner's interest, and then ultimately the owner's financial constraints will often dictate some of the specific techniques that are going to be utilized. Okay, so if we just go through them one at a time. So the goal of reduce stress and strain on the lamellar interface. Nobody can argue that, right? That's something we want to do, and we're going to recruit the frog and sole into load bearing. But the specifics of a heart warmer, Equipack heel plate, compression material, soft ride boots, closed cell phone pads, any of those things, those are all the things that can be argued, right? Okay, but the principle can't. So that's what we like to do, and then you need to familiarize yourself with as many different ways as possible to do that. Okay. So obviously, heart bars and pads, Equipack, heel plates, different packing materials. So again, it's not uncommon to have horses abscessing in the toe and have a different packing material here and a different packing material in the back. So you're only limited by your own creativity and ultimately the owner's pocketbook. Put on whatever you'd like or want to do. Full pores of Equipack. You can tip them down. Any number of things you can do to them to recruit the frog and sole into load bearing, knowing that you'd like to recruit as many healthy structures as possible. So if you've got a weakened area, you want to load a healthy area somewhere else. If it's abscessing in the toe, you really want to load the heel. If it's abscessing in the medial quarter, you really want to load the other 3/4 of the horse's skull. Okay? So in my mind, I think it's that simple. Right? And we want to reduce stress and strain on the lamellar interface, so we talked about statically with the digit support, but you could also make the argument for or against wedging, just like we did with the acute laminate. Okay? But I do think movement is another big time in the lamellar interface is stress and strain. So the toe modifications, the rolled toes, the rocker toe, setting it back, and afterwards, all those things, we all like to talk about that. Nobody ever really talks about the edges. So like the Mustad Equilibriums, the Kirkhart Comforts, the Saucer shoes, the Salad Bowl shoes, even the clog does a wonderful job of easing it all the way around. So I think it's much more important to remember to do it all the way around than just focus simply on the toe. Okay? And then I think we would all agree we'd like to realign the distal phalanx to the ground. So meaning we'd like to get to whatever this horse's normal palmar angle is. Okay? Could be anywhere between 0 and 10 or more if it's was a flexural limb deformity prior to the laminitic insult. So we'd like to get back to a normal position if we can. Okay? lowering the heel does allow more normal loading on to the distal phalanx, and it does allow the hoof capsule to function more normally. However, you must be careful that you don't increase the stress and strain on the deep distal flexor tendon, that it becomes painful again, it becomes laminitic. Okay? And again, like, it's not uncommon, like I was saying, for the horse in the first year your main is a chronic limited to be at a markedly different palmar angle than it is at year 10. Like sometimes at year 10, by just the sheer nature of the animal, the more pain, the more episodes that it's had, the more likely it is to be at a steeper angle. So you do have to read the horse to a certain degree. It's not just throw up a radiograph, trim to a perfect radiograph, and call it a day. You're trimming and showing a horse. You got to let the horse's comfort dictate over top of the radiograph, and that's often forgotten. We're not just going for a perfect radiograph. We're going for a relatively comfortable horse is what we want to achieve. And then we'd like to realign the hoof capsule to the distal phalanx. And so this is where I say in a chronic state, once they're stabilized, and if they have sufficient sole depth to do it, I think you can just hammer the wall in. And if they don't have the sole depth to do it, you will get in trouble. It will cause them to be lame. And it can make nailing unsafe sometimes. But I do think that the pluses of encouraging new growth to be parallel to the horse's distal phalanx and reducing the incidence of abscesses or white line disease far outweighs, me maybe not being able to nail or me having to find a different place to nail into. Okay? But if you start leaving a lot of foot out there just simply to nail to it, I think you can end up with a crappier foot over the long period if you just hammer it back and take a little nail or glue it up or do something else. Okay? So I'm pretty quick to drive it back in a chronic state. Okay? And again, just like the others, I would say that radiographic assessment is key. Okay? And it will tell you the position of the distal phalanx and then the hoof capsule, and it will serve as a baseline for rechecks. So I tell you, any farrier is probably remiss if they have a chronic laminitic and just never have it radiographed. Okay, because they can drift on us and we can get ourselves in trouble. So I don't think it's being weak. I don't think it's being uneducated. I don't think it's wrong to ask to have a chronic laminitic radiographed every 6 months or a year. And I don't think it's a bad thing if you go out and see a client for the first time and they drag out fluffy here and it's clearly a chronic laminitic and you're looking at it. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for radiographs to be taken prior to trimming. Because if you're trimming, everything's fine. Who cares? Everybody's happy. You did good, right? But then that one time you trim it, it comes up lame just because you didn't know it only had 4 millimeters sold up. Then everybody's upset. You feel bad. The owner's mad. The owner's bad enough and all over town. The poor pony's lame. And it all could have been alleviated with a simple radiograph. Hell, it's not our money, so try to. I would strongly encourage you to advocate for it and not be hesitant to speak up when you think it's needed. Okay? Because again, I think we've all been presented with these horses, right? You see the foot, okay? And so obviously there's no real way to play this game, but think in your mind, so sit and stare at those 2 images, and then ask yourself where you think the distal phalanx is within the hoof capsule.
The way it's growing out of the corner, man, it's probably not.
It is probably, yeah. So we can make the argument that's probably, I mean, there's a lot of probabilities. That's probably the angle of the distal phalanx. We rip the shoe off in the pad. We could probably look at the angle of the frog and get a pretty good idea. Okay, we could knife the bottom and look and try to figure out how much sole depth you have. Okay, everybody got a relative picture in your mind? Okay, so where's the bone? We take the radiograph. Okay, so this one, if we decided we're just going to hammer it back, trim it, set it back, we won, right? This one's going to go well, just in doing those things. Okay, so is this where everybody thought the distal phalanx would be? Or pretty close? Yeah, no, so again, that one's a pretty easy one. Okay, it does have a pretty decent medial-lateral imbalance, but you can see that right here. Like Patrick said, this angle likely matches that angle. see it. I mean, it deviates some, but if you were just to follow that, hammer it back, we'd have a happier, healthier foot. You know, we've got adequate sole depth, not a huge ton, not a whole lot of excess, but we do have adequate sole depth. Okay? You know, we've got the slight medial-lateral imbalance, but again, if you're looking at that growth ring or that pinched part on the dorsal hip wall, it probably matches that angle pretty closely. So that's an easy one to guess, and we would have it right. What about this little guy? So obviously another chronic laminitic. It's presented at the hospital. It's got longer hair, and I'll tell you this is in August. So this is a lesion. So the horse broke an abscess right there. All right, so everybody take a guess. Kind of picture where you think the distal phalanx is in this one. Got a pretty good idea. And then when you look at this radiograph, is that where everybody guessed it would be? Yeah. So some people say yes. I mean, you got to be honest with yourself. Hell, I don't know. When it walked in, if I hadn't known the history, I wouldn't have guessed that's where it was.
It looks like he has under a heel, but you usually don't get it.
Yeah, no, so this little guy, I mean, he's got underrun heels. I mean, that's an abnormal angle. You know, it's the thing that really made me ask questions before they set up the radiograph was, why is this horse here? And that's fresh. I didn't do it. Why is this horse standing here in this set of cross ties? You know, you get the history. This horse was just trimmed 2 days ago, and it's crippled. Well, here you can see why. And it's not that this poor guy just went out and said, you know what, I'm just going to cripple a horse today. You know, I just want to work my ass off and cutting all this sole out, you know, rasping it down to nothing. I doubt very seriously he got up and asked himself that. Made that the goal for the day. But the feet like this, you know, where they have these growth rings and they grow more heel than toe, you know, they can just slowly drift on them, right? So if you're trimming them, and let's be honest, most of us are going to be conservative, right? And so if the goal is to trim a lot more heel than toe on this horse, you know, we're probably going to be a little cautious. And let's say we're a millimeter off in January. We leave an extra millimeter. Horse grows the exact same thing again. We're off another millimeter too. Do the same thing. Do the same thing. Do the same thing. And you can see by, you know, July, August, September, we could be markedly off. So they just slowly creep on you, and then one day you run out of sole depth, right? So again, if you had this horse and you were a millimeter off 6 times in a row, that's not a big difference if you have that radiograph taken in June, July, see it, and then adjust accordingly. So again, that's why I don't think it's a bad idea to use radiographs to check yourself to a certain extent. But I think you really need to be down there with a micrometer trying to make everything perfect. No, but that's a pretty big picture of what we can do with this horse versus what we can do with that horse. You know, those are two totally different things, right? But nobody ever wants to pick up a foot and do that. You know, obviously it's not going to be comfortable. And this is the one I'm telling you with, you know, without sufficient sole depth, you can't just come in here and start hammering this back. So it'll just get worse.